Could the next pope come from Africa or Asia? Those are the regions where the Catholic Church is growing fastest. In the shadow of the giant pillars that encircle St. Peter's Square, Nancy Samai sells visitors tickets to the Vatican museums. A Roman Catholic, Ms. Samai arrived in Italy 22 years ago after fleeing the civil war in her native Sierra Leone. As she works, she can see the very window from which Pope Francis greets pilgrims on a Sunday. Like many of them, she wonders whether one day the face that emerges from that window might be black. If America can have Barack Obama as its president, then surely the next pope can be African, she says. That's my dream. That's what I'm praying for. Similar thoughts may occur to the 21 prelates whom Pope Francis will appoint as cardinals on December 8th. Those still below the age of 80 when he dies or retires will be eligible to take part in the conclave, the assembly at which the next pope will be chosen. Francis has used his power of nomination to alter a geographical balance that, until quite recently, heavily favored the rich world, particularly Italy. At the last conclave in 2013, Europeans and North Americans cast 64% of the votes. In an election held immediately after the consistory, they would have 52%. The Pope now carries out most of his duties from a wheelchair. But that is because of a dodgy right knee, not a life-threatening disease. In September, Francis embarked on his longest ever foreign trip, flying more than 30,000 kilometers to visit Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, East Timor, and Singapore. Still, at 87, the punishing demands of the pontificate must weigh increasingly heavily and, as time goes by, the temptation to hand over to a younger, fitter man will surely grow. As an Argentine, Francis is the first non-European to head the church since 741 AD, when a Syrian, Gregory III, ended his reign. Now that the church has broken a mold that had remained intact for almost 13 centuries, there is inevitably speculation that his successor might be from Africa or Asia. Peter Turkson, a Ghanaian, was widely tipped for the papacy at the last conclave, but his star has since dimmed. The two continents accounted for 31% of a global Catholic population of almost 1.4 billion at the end of 2022, according to the Vatican. But these figures understate the continent's importance because they do not include China, where there are perhaps an additional 12 million Catholics. Moreover, they record the number of baptized Catholics thought to be alive but take no account of those who have since abandoned their faith. In Europe and North America, which nominally contain a further 27% of the worldwide flock, secularization and disillusion with clerical abuse scandals have prompted large numbers of Catholics to abandon their faith or their allegiance to Rome. The same is increasingly true in South and Central America, which accounts for 41% of the total. It is, however, not true for Africa, the continent where the Catholic flock is growing fastest. Between 2013 and 2022, it grew by 22%, see chart. Over the same period, the number of Catholics in Asia, excluding China, increased by 13%. There is, of course, no scientific method for gauging the intensity of collective faith. But a couple of rough and ready yardsticks suggest that Africa is also where belief is most fervent. The first is levels of observance. In 2023, researchers at Georgetown University in Washington looked at attendance at Mass in 36 countries. Though only 2 African ones were included, they were ranked first and second. 94% of Catholics in Nigeria and 76% in Kenya said they went to Mass at least once a week. A second yardstick, at least for men, is the number studying for the priesthood. The Vatican's figures show that over the 10 years to the end of 2022, that number dropped on every continent except Africa, where it rose by 24%. The Bigard Memorial Seminary at Enugu in Nigeria is thought to be the world's largest training school for Catholic priests, with more than 700 seminarians. Other powerful arguments also strengthen the case for an African pontiff. But formidable obstacles rise up, too. The first, usually discussed sotto voce, is safeguarding, a term that those in and around the Vatican prefer over sexual abuse. It is feared that the scandals that have already rocked the Church to its core in Europe, North America, and parts of South and Central America could start to erupt in Africa during the next papacy. That is not the only such risk. On a continent where a man without a woman often courts social disapproval, some priests take a female partner early in their careers and sometimes father children, only to dispense with both partner and offspring if promoted. A pontiff who was discovered after his elevation to have followed that path would cause immense embarrassment to the church. The other factors all have to do with the character and composition of the next conclave. After the forthcoming consistory, there will be 140 so-called cardinal electors. Of these, all but 30 will have been appointed by the ruling pontiff, who has mostly favored men with a similarly broad-minded outlook to his own. The African cardinals may simply be too forcefully conservative for them, though some would doubtless appeal to the more traditionalist cardinals in America's deeply divided Catholic Church. Back in the 1990s, Pope St. John Paul II complained privately that African prelates were too reticent in their dealings with him. Francis is unlikely to share that view. Two of the most blatant challenges to his authority have come from African cardinals. Robert Sarah of Guinea, whom Francis put in charge of the Vatican department that polices liturgy, hurled down the first gauntlet. One of the most visible changes introduced by the reforming Second Vatican Council in the 1960s was to make priests and bishops say Mass facing their congregations. But in 2016, Cardinal Sarah told them they should revert to the earlier practice of facing away. 6 days later, he was reprimanded by the Pope, and the Vatican issued a statement claiming his words had been incorrectly interpreted. The Second Rebellion was more broad-based and forced Francis into a mortifying U-turn. Last year, the Vatican's chief theologian published a document authorizing the blessing of same-sex couples, so long as it was not done as part of a liturgical ritual, let alone a gay marriage. The document caused an uproar in Africa. The head of the continent's bishops, Cardinal Fridolin Ambongo Basungu of Congo, flew to Rome and browbeat Francis into endorsing an opt-out for Africa. It was a rare, if not unprecedented, declaration that one area of the notionally universal church did not have to follow the Vatican's guidance on a specific issue. A further reason for doubting that the next pope will come from Africa stems from Francis's policy of choosing cardinals from unlikely places, often in countries where other faiths are dominant, to show that no part of his church is forgotten. He has conferred the scarlet biretta, the four-pointed headgear of cardinals, on the bishops of Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, Equilobia in Nigeria, Huetenango in Guatemala, Tonga, and Stockholm. The result is that at the next conclave, very few of the cardinals will know each other or who to vote for, says Andrea Gagliarducci, an independent Vatican analyst. One cardinal they all know is Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's most senior official. In November, bookmakers gave him the best odds for succeeding Francis. But many regard Cardinal Parolin with more fear than affection, and the unique character of the next conclave could also mean that a little-known cardinal with a magnetic personality could emerge as a serious candidate. Few of Africa's cardinal electors fall into that category. But there is an exception. Cristobal Lopez Romero, a jovial, bearded Spaniard and member of the Salesian order, who is the Archbishop of Rabat in Morocco. Like Francis, a second-generation son of Italian immigrants, Cardinal Lopez Romero, a white cardinal with an African archdiocese, has the advantage of strong links with both the poorer and the richer worlds. He lived for more than 20 years in Latin America.
Hope for the best.
A final consideration is that although the cardinal electors do not always vote for papal candidates from their own neighborhood, Africa's representation in the next conclave will not reflect the importance of Africa. The continent's Catholics account for a fifth of the total. Yet, after the consistory, Africa will have only 18 cardinal electors able to cast 13% of the votes. In sharp contrast, Asia, which has barely half as many Catholics, will soon have 18% of the clout. Largely because of Francis's appointments, it is likely to have a bigger say in who becomes the next pope than even Latin America. It is as if he were pointing us in that direction, said a Vatican official. Until recently, the bookmaker's favorite was Luis Antonio Tagle, a much-liked cardinal from the Philippines who headed the Vatican department responsible for most of the poor. But his chances suffered in 2022 when Francis removed him as president of the Catholic Church's global charity, Caritas Internationalis, along with the organization's entire leadership. The Vatican cited failures of management and procedures, seriously prejudicing team spirit and staff morale. Asia, like Africa, is a growth area for the Catholic Church. In Georgetown University's ranking of attendance at Mass, Lebanon, 69%, and the Philippines, 56%, placed third and fourth. Although the number of Asian candidates for the priesthood fell by 9% from 2013 to 2022, this was less than the dizzying 31% drop in Europe. So, could a surprise emerge from the East? A name sometimes mentioned is that of Cardinal Lazarus Yu Hyung-sik from South Korea, who heads the Vatican's Department for the Clergy. Like many Asian Catholics, he was baptized late, at 16. Said to be theologically mainstream, but active in denouncing social injustice and political authoritarianism, Cardinal Yu has a profile not unlike that of the late Pope, St. John Paul II, who stood for a Catholicism with few ifs or buts. Kim Wan-young, a Korean writer on religion, says the cardinal has all the characteristics of the inhabitants of his native region of Chungcheong. They are kind and respectful, and faced with controversies, they often do not reveal what they are thinking. These would be useful attributes for any pope.